you are gonna see some cool ass shit.
Yeah, you don't want 2 flavor flavors.
Heart transplants, brain surgeries. I've seen it all.
Dude, that's fucking dope.
Walk up and just get it, whatever it is.
Yeah, brother.
I'm trying not to laugh, bro, but Josh is fucking killing me.
Guess what Navy SEALs do, motherfucker? They communicate and they're on the same fucking page.
Whoa.
And we're live.
Welcome everybody to the Happy Hoodlums podcast. We're back again. We got the host Kemper Woodruff and the co-host Mr. Zachary Sampson in here. And tonight there's a very special guest. And I have to give a preface to the introduction right now because there's few people that are so cool they just find their way into your conversation, right? And my dear friend Sarasvati is definitely that person. As we go with this tonight, I want you to understand that Sarasvati is a pillar in this community, okay? She has a horde of people always following her from every career that you could ever want. She has an incredible husband now, and his name is Mr. Karahan. He's changed the game just like she has. We would expect no less, everybody. Miss Sarasvati. Ah!
Hi, so good to be here. Thank you.
Welcome back, my friend. So, a little bit about you. You're an Alaska native. So, tell us a little bit about like what growing up was like for you and kind of how you got out to Oregon.
So, I grew up in a town called Ketchikan, which is an island in southeast Alaska, and the land is primarily Tlingit, and the tribes there are Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian. There are more totem poles there than anywhere else in the world. So I grew up in a really magical place that has a lot of love for things like animal medicine, things like raven and salmon and deer and wolf, and believes that everything and everyone has something to teach. I grew up as a dancer. I did ballet and jazz, all different types of dance. And by the time I was 16, I was already studying anatomy. Um, when I was like 19, I ended up finding yoga. Um, and I never planned on teaching yoga. I actually thought I was going to become a professor of Russian literature, but I ended up practicing yoga, and my teachers were like, "We really think you should be a teacher." And actually, this July, I will have been teaching yoga for 20 years, which is
Damn.
crazy. I know it's been a while. Yeah, and so then I did a little bit of traveling. I was in Bali and had a really magical experience there. And then I ended up in Seattle, and my teachers lived half the year in Bali and half the year in Seattle. And so after training with them for about a year and a half, I then went and lived in the jungle in Bali, and I studied yoga and I became a yoga teacher. Um, and I did a lot of before I came to Oregon, like before I had children, my kids are 13 and 15 now, which is crazy.
Mhm.
Kemper knows them. They're wild.
Yeah.
And before I had kids, I wanted to travel. And so one of the things I did was I went to India, and I traveled through India alone for about 3.5 months. And then, yeah, I was just sort of like in the right place at the right time, and I ended up meeting one of the heads of Yin really quite a while back in Ashland, Oregon, and I started, teaching classes. When I was in Alaska, I would teach there, and I would teach in Oregon, and then I ended up meeting my kid's dad, and I've been in Portland for like 15 years now, and me and my kids live here with my husband, Hassan. Yeah.
Awesome. So you almost touched on exactly where I was going next, which is a little bit about how you got your name. Because in order for people to
Uh,
understand the kind of like mythically spiritual being you are, like this will definitely just set the stage for that.
Yeah. Um, so I've talked about this many times about how this happened, and like when I started doing yoga in Seattle, I think I was like 20 years old, and none of my friends did yoga. This was in the early 2000s, and yoga hadn't like quite blown up. It was like about to blow up in like 2 years, but I caught it like right at the end. And all of my friends were like metal musicians. And my partner at the time was a metal guitarist. So everyone I hung out with was like in a music scene. And all my friends were like, why are you hanging out with people in unitards? And I was like, this is so great. But it was I was I was definitely the youngest person in class. Like mostly it was 40 to 80-year olds practicing. So I was like by far the youngest person, and I just knew that like I wanted to be like them because I knew that they knew things I didn't know, and they all practiced yoga. So I was just like on this path. And like I said, I wasn't planning on becoming a teacher. And so what happened was right before I ended up going to yoga school in Bali, I was in meditation and I had this crazy vision basically. And this person came to me, although I still don't know like what I saw, like if it was Babaji or if it was like Buddha, like I don't know who this person was. They had really long hair. Um, and they said to me, they said, you will see a word and it will be on fire. And when you see this word, you're going to change your name. And I literally came out of my meditation laughing because I was like, that's like some Hare Krishna bullshit. Like I was like, what? I'm not gonna change my name. Like what? I was like, this is so weird. Like what is that? And the next day, I was reading Tantra by George Fierstein, and I turned the page, and up in the left corner was the word Sarasvati spelled with a V, not a W, which is interesting because it's spelled like different depending on how you use it, but there's no W sound in India. And so a lot of times you'll see it with the V, and it's actually like in Bali you might say Saraswati, but in India you would say Sarasvati. And when I saw the word, it was bright red, and I like dropped the book and I was like, whoa. And the way I describe it is it was like a guillotine, like it separated who I was into who I would become. And at that moment, I knew that that would become my name. And I brought that word to my teachers in Bali. And I remember this day because we were sitting on their porch and we're looking out on this beautiful ravine into the jungle. And I told them what had happened. And I was like, I'm gonna change, my name and take this word as my name. And they were like, do you know what this word is? And I was like, yeah, it's a river that used to be flowing through India. And they were like, this is a lot more than a river. This is the first goddess of India, and she is married to Brahma. So she is like the head goddess of India. And what made it weirder was that in Bali, 3 days later was Saraswati Day. So I was brought to this like tailor and put in this lace contraption. And on that day, Saraswati is shown with 4 arms. And here's something really weird too. I hadn't gone into neuroscience yet, but she represents art and science. So all these like, there's many strange things in my life, but it was sort of like laid out. And on the day that I was initiated and brought to the Saraswati temple, there was like a huge storm, and like a monsoon rain. So in Bali on this day, everyone puts books in the street because Saraswati is about knowledge. So I'm like running through the streets, like holding this lace dress up, and there are just like books floating by in like a river. And it was just like so epic. And so I changed my name. And at this point, yeah, it's like at this point, I have been Saraswati even longer, I think, than I had my old name.
See, now you guys understand just how cool she is, and it's about to get better. Okay, so um, quick question: what made you move from dance to yoga? Obviously, it seems like there's an overlap with stretching for ballet. Like I know my mom did ballet, so she was always stretching and stuff. But at what
Yeah.
point did the culture, transition for you where
Mm.
you're like, oh, I like the yoga more than the ballet?
Well, I only really danced until I was like 17. And in my last couple of years, I was very lucky because the person that primarily trained me in my last 2 years actually used to dance for Prince. And she had come from LA because she hurt her ankle and she had come to train us. So I was very, very lucky to have that kind of training. But the ballet world, especially in the dance world, is very much about how it looks, and there's a lot of eating disorder issues. And honestly, one thing that we know now in Yin is that our bones ultimately determine what we can and can't do. So it's not just effort, it's what the bones will allow. And I don't have the best bone structure for ballet. There's some stuff that's good, other things not so much. But honestly, 'cause I always keep it very real. Part of why I went into like, neurobiology of trauma and addiction and all those different aspects was because I didn't have a very good memory. In the dance world, you have to be, they'll teach a section and then run through it once and they're like, go, and then they move on. So you have to learn very quickly. And because of my trauma, I was not able to learn fast enough. But now I'm glad because most of the people I know that were pro dancers, their bodies are destroyed from dance. And so I was kind of done dancing around 17. And then when I found yoga, I was like, I love this because I can move, it feels good, but the culture is very different than the dance world.
So, what style of yoga did you start with initially,
Mm.
and how did your lineage of teachers kind of come to be? Because for those that don't
Yeah.
know, in yoga, your lineage is very important. There's a serious reverence for where the knowledge is transferred from, and who
Yeah.
you resonate with spiritually.
So are you talking
Yeah,
about like the
totally.
line of teachers that you have when you say
Hmm.
lineage? Okay.
Yeah. And so even though like the first decade I taught, I just taught very traditional, what's called hatha, or sometimes looks like hatha, which is like a very classic. You do a lot of standing poses, seated. If you've ever done yoga, the chances are good that you did vinyasa, which is very fast moving, and that sort of stems, everything kind of stems from hatha. But the main thing that I've been teaching for the last decade is yin. And I'm going to talk about the lineage from that. First, I do want to recognize my teachers at the Hatha Yoga Center. That's Bob Smith and Key McGraw, and they are amazing. And they have teachers that came from parts of Europe and then through India. But the really the style that I'm the most connected with, it has to do with Yin. And I was really just like in the right place at the right time. So when I lived in Ashland, Oregon, I was like teaching a little bit of yoga. I was also working in a coffee shop. And one day, this guy, Matt Schulman, came in and he was like, hey, I'm going to become a massage practitioner. I heard you used to be a dancer. Can I give you a massage? And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, yeah, yes, love massage. And
Hmm.
so he was basically recognizing that people had different mobility in their body based on their bones. And I remember us kind of chatting about yoga, but he was talking about like glial cells and fascia, and I didn't know what he was talking about because he's really smart. So I was like, I don't know what Shulman's talking about. I'm just gonna like have him rip the scar tissue off my hamstrings. But he was in Ashland because he was studying jujitsu with Paul Greeley, and Paul Greeley is what we think of as like the head of yin in America. So I want to back up and explain that yin, which is primarily what I teach, and that's what Kemper is trained to teach also. Yin is the stretching from the Tai Chi Pekwa monkey style kung fu. And so, for many generations, I think about 9 generations in China, it was passed through this very specific family. And then these three brothers, they were meant to sort of like take everything over. But the youngest brother was like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to move to America. He moved to Los Angeles. And I believe in the 80s, he had kind of given up the martial arts realm. But one day outside of the LA library, he saw Polly Zink doing eagle style kung fu, and this guy was watching Polly Zink and he thought there's something about the way this guy moves and his bones, he would make a sick monkey boxer. So he approached him and was like, "Can I train you?" And Zink accepted. So he trained Paulie Zink, and that year, Paulie Zink won Kung Fu Champion of America. And people were like, "Where did this guy come from?" Right? He was like so amazing. So Paulie Zink taught others then what he had learned from his Chinese lineage teacher, and he taught things like Taoism, meditation, what we call like animals and alchemy, um, kung fu stances, weapons training, all different types of weapons, lots of different weapons. And then he also taught this kind of deep stretching. So the deep stretching is what we now call yin. And you can actually see videos and stuff of Polly Zink, who's like an absolute pretzel doing yoga. And he used to have infomercials on at night. So Paul Greeley, I know it's confusing because there's two Pauls. So Paulie Zink is like the first guy, but Paul Greeley was into jujitsu and he thought, I'm going to go study with Zink because I've heard this guy is amazing. And we all assumed that if we had a good teacher and we worked hard, that we could also put our feet behind our head and, do the splits and everything. So he went and trained really hard for a whole year with Zinc. But after about a year, he realized that no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't do physically the things that his teacher could. And so that helped him to understand more about the bones. And then that's what became skeletal variation, which is a foundation of what we teach in yin, meaning that really our bones determine what we can and can't do. And so that not only changed the game for yoga, but the med world and like has expanded really how we know everything about the body. And it was because of the things that Greeley couldn't do, which I also think is really cool. So
Mm-hmm.
Greeley started, he was teaching, he was actually down in San Francisco at Yoga Tree. And one day, because he was like into Bikram and different styles, but one day he was just doing yin stretching on his own. And Sarah Powers, who's a very famous teacher, she was like, Greeley, what are you doing? And she said, it looks like you removed all the yang and left the yin. And that's why we call it yin. So
Whoa.
yeah,
I
yeah. So
never.
it was just like random. It was just like all these random things. And so Greeley started teaching in Ashland, and Schulman came from Connecticut to study with him and was his like right hand person for 6 years. And I just was in the right place at the right time and met Schulman. And so then many years passed, and I ended up here in Portland, Oregon, and I was running a yoga studio, and somebody wanted to teach yin. And I thought, I think Schulman was talking about that style. And so I had him come and teach. But one night his bus broke down and he couldn't make it. So he said, Saraswati, tonight you're going to teach yin. And I was like, I don't know how to teach yin. And he said, I'm going to tell you what to do. And after that, I started doing yin all the time. And I did an experiment on myself where I did yin every day in a row for 750 days. And now for the last decade, I've done pretty much nothing but teach yin.
See, first of all, the dedication to do the like, because yin is not like the cool looking yoga, right?
Yeah.
It's very basic stretches sometimes and just
Yeah,
allowing time and gravity to do the work. So um
exactly.
and, and this is the beauty of it, is that your body knows what to do.
Yeah.
And our minds can be so busy and full of things that it's like you got words and ideas and stuff coming in and you don't know how to turn it off, but it will turn off naturally when you seat your soul like in your body.
Yeah.
So
And
so real quick, for people who don't understand, can you explain Yin Yoga?
yeah, so, well, first of all, I will try my best and I will let Saraswati correct me, okay? Because I did get some training through her to be a teacher, but like her, I never really intended to be a yoga teacher. I'm just kind of a fan of yoga and I think it's rad. So, in your body, you have connective tissue that surrounds the muscle. And so, when you see like the anatomy chart and it's red on one side of the pec and white on the other, the white is the connective tissue, and that is the highest level. So, like if you were to skin somebody, that's the first thing you're going to see is connective tissue. And then underneath that connective tissue lies the muscle, and the muscle belly is the center point of a muscle, right? So, if I'm exercising my muscles, right? I'm training it to contract, and then my fascia will essentially shorten and harden around that contracted muscle. So, overuse of your body without stretching, what we're really doing is shortening our range of motion. And what yin does is it places you in a stretch. And so, under relaxed tension, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
elicited by the pose, right? So you're sitting there, you're leaning forward, your hamstring is not letting go, your back's kind of stiff in the beginning, right? Well, over about a minute and a half time, that muscle is going to lengthen fully. And you're just going to sit there and breathe. And at about the 3 minute mark, that muscle will reach its entire length, relax, and now the fascia will begin to unwind itself. And you can restore your body's natural state and full length and range of motion through the unwinding of the fascia.
Yeah.
Because, and the analogy that Sarasvati always taught us with was imagine a cold stick of butter turning to a warm stick of butter. It's going to melt. And you just kind of melt into this pose right around the 3 minute mark. And so yin is a very like prolonged process, whereas vinyasa and kind of hatha centric stuff involves more movement. This
Yeah.
is using your breath to consciously move your chi through your body. And we can go into meridians and all that, but I feel like that might take us down a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah.
How did that sound?
Yes, yes. And I will mention this because there's a lot of new stuff. Meridian sounds like the woo-woo, but there's a lot of new stuff that has come out in the Western med realm where they are looking now not only at fascia, but really the fluid within the fascia, things like hyaluronic acid, hormones, insulin. They call this now the interstitium. And they are now able to prove that that is where chi flow happens. They've also done some experiments to understand and validate acupuncture, and that's all very new within the last 4 months.
Woo!
Yes,
Now,
phenomenal. Yeah.
someone couldn't be up on things like you are without the network of people that you've met just by
Yeah.
being a super rad yoga teacher. And so I am going to derail us just a tiny bit so you can tell about how you were the counterculture yoga teacher at first. Do you mind touching on
Yeah.
that?
No, totally. So I teach yin specifically, and I talk about yin for anxiety, depression, PTSD, insomnia, eating disorder recovery, trauma, and addiction. And when I first started going into this, part of the reason that I kind of went down this route was because I realized that like copying other teachers like wasn't working. It wasn't giving me success, and I was just like, I don't care. I'm just gonna like swear and eat gummy bears and just like be my real self and talk about things that nobody's talking about. And so when I first started teaching yin, I actually had a couple of people that were vets, and they had been sort of dealing with PTSD and tried lots of things to get better, but for some reason yin was working really, really well. And I was not only hearing from my students that it was, helping their mental health and their gut digestive and their sleep and all of this, but I would get like letters, from psychologists and stuff were coming to my classes and being like, what are you doing? This is working so well. And I was like, I don't know. I'm just teaching like kung fu yoga. Like, I don't know what's happening. And so I went back and I ended up studying interpersonal neurobiology at PSU because, as I like to say, Kaiser Permanente doesn't care about my chakras. So I have to I have to provide data because it's like, and we know that it works, but now we can explain how. And part of, how I teach really differently is I try to keep it very real. And I just noticed that a lot of people, they were kind of being fake, or they I don't know, like I just wanted to be a different kind of teacher because I felt like it was more helpful to talk about dealing with depression and PTSD and addiction. And that was actually allowing me to help more people. Yeah. And so, and I definitely, like, I think I teach about between 80 and 90 classes a month, and I do usually a couple workshops. I do trainings each year. I do international retreats. And at this point, it's like I really built something just by being who I am, and the things that could have been an obstacle became opportunity.
Well said. Um, I also want to add, like, just to the story a little bit of nuance. So when we were talking, you were talking about how you would show up to your class and be like, "Oh crap," and you're like, "I'm in high heels, smoking a cigarette," and I'm like ashing a cigarette out and showing up like, "Hey, everybody," And then, I say this because, people have an idea of what a yoga teacher is, right? And they like this idea almost more than the reality of it. And I
Yeah,
feel that that's culturally what we do in a lot of things, but with yoga teachers, it's different, right?
yeah, totally.
Um, and that was one of the things. Like for me, I realized like maybe I'm not supposed to be a yoga teacher because for some reason, crazy ass things just keep following me. But at the same time, by doing by living those experiences, yoga as a tool for life and learning yin from you and Matt Schulman has helped me process so much traumatic shit that I've been through that
Mhm.
I don't even know how people live without it.
Oh,
Because
totally. I talk
yeah,
about this all the time. I'm like, how do people, what do they do without yoga? Because if I didn't have yoga, like, I wasn't gonna make it. Like, I was not okay. Like, I needed something. Yeah.
yeah. And so I just want to touch on this because like we don't really admit that like it is okay to not be okay, but
Hmm.
staying there is actually an option, and escaping really isn't an option. And the more that you're able to resonate with this little corner of the universe that exists inside of yourself and go within yourself, your body will actually like act as a gateway to meditation. And that's
Hmm.
what a lot of people don't understand about the beauty of yin that I discovered is like, and I discovered it by accident because I would be sitting there in class like, all right, like my brain's supposed to shut off, like what's gonna happen, and it would come in like 15 seconds of like clarity, and then I would be like, oh shit, I'm not thinking, and then I'm like, damn it, I'm thinking about thinking. Okay, uh, and
Yeah.
that's like the beginning of the journey into yoga. But there's
Yeah.
something so serene about that elusive 15 seconds of peace that it will change
Yeah.
your entire life if you seek to go there.
One of the things we have to remember is that with both yoga and martial arts traditions, there were often a lot of secrets because with great power comes great responsibility. And they wanted, like to be a part of Shaolin Temple, you would have to really show your dedication. You have to prove, by meditating for many days, like out in the heat, out in the cold. If you are allowed into Shaolin, you shave your head and you take a vow to never do anything bad with the information that you learn. And I say this because I think that a lot of times in the West, where people go wrong in trying to meditate, is they sit in half lotus or lotus, they close their eyes, and their mind goes crazy. And after 5 minutes, they're just like this and they're out. But they don't understand that that process has to happen. It is a clearing of the thoughts. And so yin not only it's not only a cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's a form of Taoist meditation. And when I teach, one thing I do differently is some people are like, follow your breath, do this. And I'm just like, let your mind wander, process. You know, if we start going down a thought path that we really don't want to go down, we could reroute it. But honestly, I say, let yourself think it out, because in that container where we're able to process, we're able to answer a lot of our own questions. And then we start to have those moments of clarity, but not because we force it, because it comes naturally in the process of yoga. But they don't teach that because they want us to get there by experience.
Mm, yeah, and I just want to kind of go on a little tangent about our bodies remembering things, like having a physical memory and trauma. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, one thing that we're learning more about with yin is that while there are a lot of changes in things like the fascia, the connective tissues, muscles, a lot of what's actually happening has to do with the nervous system itself. And we have memory stored in the body, but it's not like we would think. Like when we say muscle memory, that's a misnomer, because the memory is not in the muscle, it's in the nervous system connected there. But when we're doing something like yin, we're using all these parts of the body, and it's done in a way where we have a lot of control. We can go deeper in the stretch or we can release, and we find sort of like the edge of sensation, so that we end up really training our nervous system, so that then we're able to slowly and at our own pace review any traumatic events, because they come up in the body, and it's because we're getting into the nervous system and possibly into areas that we don't usually go into by doing that kind of deep stretch. We also allow enough space just to think about it, because if we've dealt with a lot of trauma, the chances are good that we're filling our moments of the day. We don't want to even have time to think about it. And one thing that I talk a lot about is how with PTSD, we tend to either like drink or smoke pot or not sleep. But the very thing that we need is to sleep and dream, because when we dream, we process emotion. So yin is like the first domino that sets off this whole domino effect of health, but it's very basic. And people feel like it's something that they can actually do. It's really available to them and they can go at their own pace. It's really bio individual.
Mm-hmm.
A
And
crazy,
one of the
a crazy fact about the body that has started to come up in terms of like the memory part that you guys are talking about is
Hmm.
they proved scientifically that they can store information on DNA. And so what
No,
they
yes.
and so they started with like a really small amount, and they were
Wow.
able to put like 3 petabytes on it, which is 1,000 uh terabytes. So 100 or 1,000, however many that is. Anyways, three
Wow.
petabytes on a small little chunk of DNA, very tiny. And what they theorized or estimated is that the entire human body can hold 13.9 billion years of information, which is as old
Whoa.
as the universe, which would be a crazy thought to think about.
well, that kind of goes
Yeah.
back to the holographic universe thing of
um,
everything being interconnected.
and it's crazy
Um,
that the way that they do it,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is.
That's so
It's
phenomenal.
it's pretty wild.
Well, and there's a lot of pieces to this that we know, things like epigenetics, which is like the stuff above the gene code. So we definitely carry information through the ancestors. We also have what is like, um, I can't remember the word for it, but it's like memories that, yeah, it's been stored through the system. So we could be even like remembering things that were like passed from the ancestors, so that it like they tagged it in their memory without even knowing it, which then tags it in our memory, because our system is trying to constantly evolve, and that's how we pass information. Yeah, it's really interesting. Genetics are wild.
can can you go into a little bit about like the evolution of like consciousness that a yogi kind of experiences according to like the sutras and stuff of what you know?
Yeah, and we have to remember that yoga first started, thousands of years ago, and it was only practiced by people who would have been like pariahs, like they were completely outside of society. Yoga starts with 500 years of seated meditation. There's no shapes in yoga for like 500 years. And it's all about connecting with the divine. The oldest text that we tend to reference is the Vedas, Veda meaning knowledge. And there's just a lot of studying that is done. And to understand like consciousness, it's so wild because if we are studying something in the ocean or something in space, we are studying that which is outside of us. But when we're studying neuroscience, like to study the brain, you have to use your brain. It gets real weird. And to study your consciousness, you have to use consciousness. So it is a very specific type of science where what we are studying is ourselves. And I think a lot about this. I think about the origins of yoga and how it's like what sparked people to want to do this. And what we know is that there was a lot of warring going on. There was clashing from the north and the south, in India and then like Indus Valley. And that there was this sort of moment where huge changes were happening in art and in science. And yoga appeared, but really at first it was only for people that were sort of like outside of society. And by sitting and meditating for long, long periods, they started to experience what is Advaita, and that means not to. And so they started to have something happen where they sat long enough that they no longer felt separate from the universe. And that ultimate connection was then something that they were seeking. And they started to develop what is the like eight-limbed path, which is referenced also like in the sutras. And that was basically a way to get to samadhi or nirvana and a way to get to enlightenment. But it's good to understand that like in the sutras, the first sections, the yamas and the niyamas, they're basically like the get your life together sections. And they're things like be honest and don't want, other people's lives and other people's stuff, and be aware of your energy, and don't harm other people. And so it's really like how to be in the world. And then you learn more like the pranayama, and then you learn the asana. And so originally there was a lot of work done on the self as an individual and how we showed up in the community. And the asana came later, and really the poses mean very little. They meant very little to the yogis because it was all about meditation and about how you could get to that space where you felt ultimate connection.
Hmm. And so your maturity just comes through the consistency of practice and like
Yeah,
there's it's interesting how um life is full of paradoxes and they become really apparent through observation. And it's like
yeah,
your your level of like once you truly detach, you realize that everything's connected. And how
yeah,
funny is that, right? Um
yeah,
Because it's almost like, how can that be? How can it be everything and nothing, right? How can it be both things at the same time? But it
yeah.
is. Um, but uh, you know, how? I guess I'm curious. How did you navigate dealing with other people's trauma as a teacher? Because you are one of those people that people are like magnetized to you. And I feel like they're all very different. To give you viewers some background, when we first met, which is crazy, it's almost like 8 years ago or something now.
Yeah. It's been a
And
while.
yeah, so um I had, just gotten back from New York and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Honestly, like my best friend had been murdered like a year
Mm,
before this, maybe a year and a half, and um I felt like all these things that were very institutional, you know, ways of thinking, still left me with incredible um, need for answers, like things that I was told to turn to. And some of that was like, and believe me, I'm a straight up Christian, but like I couldn't get straight answers out of the church when I would go. And sometimes my experience would be different than what I felt that it would should have been based on the teachings and the ways that like Jesus lived. Side note, Jesus is a yogi, all right? Um
Mm.
but here I am selling weed at the dispensary as a young kid, just absolutely shattered, and Sarasvati just comes in. She's like, "Hey,"
I
and you can
smoked
tell.
so much pot then. You're my savior.
She's
I don't
like,
smoke I don't smoke anymore, but I used to smoke a lot. Like what however much viewers are thinking, it's more than that.
yeah, and me too. I also supplied so much weed. I've personally put a dent in domestic violence
Oh, fuck.
statistics, but honestly, and it's funny because I don't smoke weed either anymore. But
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is like you came in and you threw something super foreign my way, and we're like, yeah, I'll just come to class. Give me a joint. I'll sneak you in. And when I came into class, it was an extremely dimly lit room, you guys. Like candle lit dim. I'm like, is this like a fucking seance? And there are so many people in this room laid out like a jigsaw puzzle all on the ground. And I'm like, what the hell have I gotten myself into? But it's so serene that I'm like, I think this is where I'm supposed to be, you know?
Yeah.
And your voice is like an instrument in the way that you teach class. It's really cool because every class has a different theme. If you go to one of Sarasvati's classes, it's all going to be different. And whatever happened that day or that week is getting integrated.
Yeah.
It's truly cutting edge of experience. Um, and I highly recommend it. But I went and I was like, I don't know why I'm hooked. And I remember we were sitting there smoking a joint after class, and I was like, I think you're my yogi. And she was like, yeah, I mean, you're probably right. And we just kept smoking. I didn't know what the hell that meant. I thought it was like kung fu training where she was like, I was like, all right, so what do I do now? Do I just like come over every day and just sit and just stretch until you're like, do the splits? I'll be back in 8 hours. Like I didn't know what the hell this meant.
Wax on, wax
Uh,
off.
well, because I'm a little bit of a freaking crazy person myself, right? And so I'm thinking I'm Shaolin now, right? And so that's not the case. I just kept getting snuck into random ass different yoga studios and stuff until one day I get through schooling and she's like, right when I finished film school, she's like, hey, I'm teaching a teacher training. And I was like, yes. And I
Yeah, and
go
that was
there
my first training. That's the first training I ever did with Shulman.
and it blew the doors off of my mind. Because for those that don't know Matt Shulman is like if you can imagine a mad scientist met Bruce Lee, and then you drop such intelligence, it's almost like Rain Man level. Like
Yeah.
he's fucking brilliant and a like spiritual vessel, like warrior of knowledge, like uncompromisingly so. And so in this class, we have Sarasvati teaching like the neuroscience level with this wonderful nuance of reality, right? And then you have the most like clinical like explanation of anatomy and in depth. He was taking like I don't know, it was like a program where you could see the skeleton and add
Yeah.
muscles, remove muscles, and we literally had to learn like how all the muscles and joints move. Pretty much like before we were doing too much with our bodies, so we knew how not to hurt ourselves and what the hell was actually like going on physically. And then there was the whole yoga philosophy side as well, because he's like an encyclopedia. And so together, that was like the coolest thing that anyone could want. And talk about being in the right place at the right time. I don't know how my ghetto ass had $1,000. I was like, yes.
Student
And
loan money, bruh.
yeah, that changed my entire life. But anytime that you've come into my life experience, it's been a very poignant turning point in my
Mm.
life. And it would be in a very auspicious but like um almost like regular moment, strangely regular moment, like when the
Do
solar
you
eclipse.
remember? Yeah, I was gonna say we were there together when the solar eclipse happened.
Yeah, I was just chilling and she just came walking by and we just watched this thing that only happens every like 100 years or something. I don't even know. And side note,
Um,
I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about me being an asshole real quick, as if you haven't had many experiences by now. But um so I closed the shop. I was like, if you don't have your weed by now, too fucking bad, bro. I'm not missing this like crazy thing going on outside. And so I closed the shop up and this dude rolls up on like one of those carts that you get from like fucking Safeway when you're the fat dude. And he's on oxygen, okay?
Oh
And
no.
I was like, nah, bro, you're waiting 2 minutes. And he was like, no. He was like, I need my shit. And he was like, I'm on oxygen, man. And I was like, hey, bro, you knew what you were working with when you came outside, you selfish fuck. And someone else came out and had to like let him in to sell him some weed. But I wasn't missing this moment. And I went right back to looking at the sun and like sharing glasses with her, like, here, here, nerding out, looking at the sky. Um,
that was so amazing.
so I might have had to
Yeah.
burn some karma off of that one. I probably had some bad events off of that one. But
Oh, that's funny.
back to the regular programming, Um, what are some of like the obstacles that yoga really helped you overcome in your own life? That allowed you to stay on this path and be an incredible mother and evolve in that, because your kids are geniuses for anyone that doesn't know, and a genius is hard to keep up with. And she's got two of them.
They are hard to keep up with. And I always have to make like really clear like I'm not a perfect mom and I'm not a perfect partner because like I'm a normal person and I make mistakes, but that's a lot of what yoga has given me is the ability to be like sometimes I fuck up and like that happens and I'm still a yogi and I'm still on that path. And for me, I think what it was honestly was that when I was growing up, I was dealing with so many mental health issues, but no one had answers for me. Nothing I found helped me. And so when I started finding answers to my questions, it became my dharma to help other people because I didn't feel like people had the answers for me, but I was finding answers that seemed to be helping a lot of people. And I feel like at this point that I have helped a lot of people, and I help people who are dealing with, addiction recovery and people that have had a lot of depression or PTSD. And I try to come from multiple angles. Some of it is very science based, and some of it is spiritual based, and some of it is really from experience. And I talk about my experience, and like I make jokes about how I like used to eat cocaine for breakfast and stuff, and people like are like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like I wasn't always teaching yoga, I went through a lot of different parts in my life, and I tell people that because then they're not like as hard on themselves, and they realize that everyone is on a different path, and it can be really helpful to realize that, like, if we don't find what we're looking for, like I didn't find what I was looking for necessarily in dance and even in like a lot of the traditional yoga. And then when I started to learn about neurobiology, I just started like mixing in all of these things to create what I wish I had had growing up and what I thought maybe would have helped me. And that's what I try to bring people. But it is very different than how other people teach. And part of how I can hold space um, for people with trauma, part of it is that I have an amazing team. Like I've got a polyvagal specialist, and I got a bunch of people that are great therapists and anatomy specialists. And so if there's anything that goes beyond my expertise, I can send them to someone who might know more than me. Um, but I also feel like I can hold a lot because I realized, like, at a young age, for example, that there were certain things that seemed taboo to talk about. And, like people didn't want to talk about their anxiety or their depression or their suicidal thoughts. And I'm like, I just talk about that stuff, and I talk about mental health stuff even in a class setting. And I remember once, this was early on teaching yin, after a class one day, this girl came up to me and she was like, you can't talk about PTSD in a class. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, that's crazy. Like nobody does that. And I was like, okay, I'll see you next week. And then she came back like all the time, and she ended up becoming a yen teacher. But at first she was like, what are you doing? Like you're doing something that no one else has done. And I was like, yeah, it works too. Watch how you sleep tonight. And it really just it came from like discovering that what everyone else was doing was only taking people so far. And even the best talk therapy was only taking people so far. They needed to get into their bodies. They needed a way to work through their shit in a non-judgmental environment, and to know that the people around them, even if they had different lives and they grew up in different places and they all had different experiences, that all of these people were working on becoming better and just being more real.
So you touched on something I really want to get at is like the ideal of a yoga community versus real life meets yoga, right? And
Yeah.
you always used to say nothing happens in a vacuum, right?
Mm.
Life doesn't
Yeah.
just stop because you're in class stretching for an hour, right?
Yeah.
And um side note, you would also always prepare people at the end of class for when they go back out into life, which I thought was really impactful. Um, so they could kind of carry this experience out of this place with them. But I really am curious how it affected you with different studios and what that was like.
Mm.
Um, did you really have to pay dearly for being rebellious in your creative like pursuit of making yoga that's real for people and not just this fairy tale thing?
I mean, I thought that I was going to, but what happened was I became well known, and because of my teaching differently, I was selling classes out. Like there's a studio I work at now. The classes I teach are sold out for months in advance. Like you can't get into them. They're sold out like literally for months. And I think that some of the studio owners kind of wanted to dislike me, but I was just making them too much money. And like and I was just really good at what I did, and they were like some of them didn't understand it, but what they started to realize is that it was working. And that even if they didn't understand it, that whatever I was doing was working. And so and so people now, like, they just kind of let me do my thing. Once in a while, they're like, we got a complaint that you said fuck too many times. And I was like, okay, cool, cool. I'm sorry about that. But yeah. um, But yeah, that's like the only thing. Some people get offended if I drop the F-bomb too much in the class or something. But no, for the most part, if somebody comes to my class, it's usually now because they've heard about it from someone else or they've been my student for a long time. But people get sent to me a lot by therapists, by doctors. Yeah, a lot of times people, or like by, by their therapist or their, psychologist, because we've discovered the how and why on basically the ways that yin works. And then we can help people to build a really successful program. And it's not usually going to be just yin, but yin is a great foundation. And then we
Mhm.
figure out, what do you add and what do you subtract? It might be that we still do our talk therapy, or it might be that, some people use AA, and everyone's got something different, but there is something about yin that is a phenomenal foundation for a lot of people.
I feel that it's so brilliant and necessary that um you basically taught a whole city full of people at this point, right? That um life isn't good just because it's pretty,
Yeah,
right? And I feel like that's the thing about yoga that's so misleading. It's not good because it's pretty. Yoga's great because it takes the shitty aspects of your life and makes them a little bit better. And it
yeah,
places you in an uncomfortable position until it becomes something else. And like the experience itself is worthwhile.
yes.
And it's like a physical metaphor for life. And I can tell you, um, because I live with myself, I am far from a perfect person, but the things that I unlocked within myself and permission I found to just be, like, shattered and all, to just be broken in a space where everyone else is okay to navigate what they're navigating. And if you go to one of Sarasvati's classes, you will see incredible diversity. I like when even when we were taking teacher training, there were like 2 90-year-old ladies in they weren't 90. Okay, they were badass, like
Maybe
60
70.
girls,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
to me, I was like, all right, what the hell? You know, they look like they would be at your grandma's table, right? And they were killing it. So shout out to them. But to this day, I really think it's so necessary we have venues and spaces and activities for people to come as they are and to not
Yes,
feel like they have to get it right. And, you know, I think that's what yoga really means to me. And
yeah.
yoga as a word means work, it is the work. And I didn't learn that until I went to like a temple over by Mount Tabor, which is way cool. And I was like, "What? Yoga means work?" And he was like, "Yeah, dude. Like, go read Swami Vivekananda's books." And I did, and I was like, when you research these guys and girls, what a true yogi goes through is a life of servitude,
Yeah.
and you should show the finger, right?
Oh, oh, my that means I'm married to yoga.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
That was the first love, and I remember she would always
Yeah.
be like, "Psh," like, because there's a lot of stuff that, like, I don't think I feel so honored to know and have gotten to experience, and it's not like pretty things in life. It's like things where it's like you just need somebody to help you out in a moment,
Yeah.
and I'm so grateful that that's like the history that we have, you know?
Yeah.
That's really special to me because I never would have thought just being a punk ass kid selling some incredible weed left and right, that I'd be sitting where I'm at like 28, able to like pay homage in some kind of way to someone who's been so impactful in my life. Because you really have helped a lot of brokenness in me be navigated just with a skill.
Well, thank you. And I mean, for all that I get to give my students, the reality is that all of my students, like, we have equal exchange. I have so many amazing friends from all of you. And because we are able to have real conversations and talk about hard shit, that helps all of us because then we become better and then we're better in our relationships and at our jobs. And it doesn't mean that it's always easy. And yeah, it's like yoga is work because it means showing up to a practice. It means that we keep checking in and we look at who we are and how we can be better. And not everyone wants to do that because it can suck. Like it can be hard, but it's worth it because otherwise we miss our lives and we're not present because we're too consumed with avoiding our feelings. But we talk about in yin there is only going through it. There's no going around it. And the very thing that makes it hard is what makes it worth it.
Hmm. Zach, you got anything before we close this puppy out?
Um, I mean, if I were to say anything, uh, it would kind of just be like in terms of, because I always think like weightlifting, right? And
Yeah.
um, how it applies to like helping the body. But I've seen some contradictory things in terms of like power sports where stretching actually, at least stretching before working out, decreases power output um,
Mm.
and someone's ability to like resist things in comparison to like if they didn't stretch, they have a better performance. And so, one, I wanted your opinion on that.
No,
But
you're
two,
right. That's true.
but number two, on the flip side, for non-power athletes, let's say bodybuilders, you actually grow more from the stretched position. So, like if, like for example, Kemper doing a bicep curl, if down here when your arms fully extended, that's when you have the most growth in the muscle. Um, and so it's kind of cool that stretching just in general applies to more than just being kind of like loose and feeling good and being still. It can also apply to like more aggressive activities, I would say.
So a couple of things. One, my dad is actually a six-time national powerlifting champion.
Oh
So
shit.
growing up, I got to see, yeah, he's a beast. He deads like 550 and he's just like a
Damn.
total beast. And I got to see, he definitely had a lot of injuries through that, but like just did some incredible things. And part of what really drew me into yin was that when I met Greeley, I had done too much yin for my glutes. And he was like, you should just go do squats at the gym. And I was like, did the head of yin just send me to the gym? But they're all martial artists. So
Yeah.
their whole thing is harmony. Don't do more stretching if what you need is to go lift weights. They're all about that. And I don't usually recommend, like, if we did yin, I wouldn't recommend to do probably weights or even running that day unless we had given minimum 30 minutes, but I honestly would give a couple of hours because you wouldn't want to do yin and then go load squat. Not at all. But you could do like yin on one day or do yin in the morning and then do like weights at night or like reverse, you could do that. But yeah, if they were too close together, especially, I think that could be problematic. And it's individual, it's like some people, I've seen these guys that are so strong but yin is very challenging because like he mentions, right, everything is so tight. And so they could do 5% stretches and over time they could actually get stronger because they're also then less likely to get injured, but it's really dependent on the body and going slow.
Another
Hmm.
thing that I really like about yoga, um, because one of my favorite things about weightlifting and fitness in general is the adaptability and being able to adjust to different people, whether it be like, oh,
Yes.
this specific movement hurts when I do it, so I need a new something new to do to grow my glutes. Um,
Right.
and what I've learned is that there's a lot of different types of yoga for all different types of people that kind of like live different lives. And that was
Totally.
something that I think I learned from you. The only class that I've gone to was with Kemper. That was the only yoga class I've ever been to. And I learned that you said something about yin being more suited for people who live more active lifestyles. And then I can't remember the one that was suggested to people who live like more sedentary, but that was something I learned. I was like,
Yeah.
adaptability in yoga is kind of sick.
Yeah, and it's always finding that harmony. It's like if sitting and meditating and doing yin has become very easy, then we might need to go for a run or do weights or do a yang practice. But if we do too much of the yang, then we add the yin for harmony. And that's honestly, this all ties in because that's so much of what sold me on yin was every other style and the teachers that I had met, they were always trying to sell something. But the yin teachers were like, we don't care what you do, just do what creates harmony. If that's doing jujitsu, then do jujitsu. If it's doing kung fu stances, then do that. If it's doing deep stretching, do that. And they recommend mix it all, but be ready for things to change, right? Keep the practice alive because what you're doing right now is probably not what you're going to need in a year or in 10 years. So not trying to do the same thing all the time, but adding and subtracting as needed, because then that really creates harmony.
It's so interesting that you just touched on the time factor because you just made a light bulb go off in my head. Because I've had a ton of injuries in my life, and I feel like yin was something that I would like run to, and then all of a sudden I broke a couple discs in my spine, and I feel like yin like kicked me out, and it was like, no, go lift weights, and
Yeah.
I was like, okay, and I went from being like bedridden to being like more active than I've ever been like in
Yeah.
my life. Um, and so time is a strange X factor to all things.
Yes. There's
Yeah.
no substitute for time, right? Also, it surprises people when I tell them that even though I teach a lot of yin at this point, my practice is mostly doing core work, doing glute strengthening, and I do a little bit of yin and a little bit of vinyasa. But I've been doing yoga for 2 decades now. It would be crazy, like I've done thousands of hours of yin and thousands of hours of the yang practices. And so at this point, what is needed for health in my body is different. Also, I'm 42 now, so I have to, do strengthening for my muscles because that's helping to keep bone density. So yeah, it's like it's cool when we can mix it and it can feel at times like, oh, I loved yin, but that's not what I'm doing right now. But even still, it's the foundation. It's still part of who we are. It's like even if we're not doing the stretching, it's a lifestyle. Yin becomes part of who we are.
I'm gonna drop a bomb on you. I think you need to do boxing training because it truly is fantastic for like when you sit down and they teach you how to like sit in your stance. So it's like it really is a full body workout. It gets your legs and your upper body. But one of the interesting things is like learning how certain muscles oppose each other, right?
Mm,
And so like you can see somebody that's like really big and like they really load up and it looks like they're about to throw like the hardest punch ever, but then it's not because their like bicep is too engaged while they're punching, right?
mm,
Like trying to throw a straight punch. When really it just comes from like your tricep and like the front head of your bicep or of your shoulder, and then when your hand turns over it like snaps at the wrist, bang. And the bicep is really what pulls it back, and so that's where you get the speed, so you're not just leaving it out there. And I feel like that would be something that I would be really intrigued to see you do and kind of take up, just on a total side
well,
note.
no, I would love it. at this point, I would love to try so many things. I have to be a little bit careful because since my body is my job, I get a little nervous, honestly. My kids wanted me to go roller skating recently, and I was like, I can't, because if I break my ass, we won't pay the PGE bill. So I would love to. Yeah. And I mean, like, there's so many things I would still love to try. And I have so many different, like, injuries from dance and all different kinds of things. But yeah, I love it. I'm into all of it because everything has something to teach. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna
Cool.
let you close us out tonight. What's your message for the world, my friend?
So I always say that the things that we do and the things that we say and the energetic arrows that we shoot, that they matter and they have tremendous impact inside of us and all around us. I also always close by saying that it is an honor and a privilege to practice yoga and meditation. And may we continue to remember that for thousands of years, these were secrets of families and traditions in places like India and China. It is an honor, it is a privilege to practice yoga and meditation.
Namaste, my friend. Until next time, y'all.
Thank you guys so
Peace.
much.
You are gonna see some cool ass shit.
Yeah, you don't want two flavor flays.
Heart transplants, brain surgeries. I've seen it all.
Dude, that's fucking dope.
Walk up and just get it, whatever it is.
Yeah, brother.
I'm trying not to laugh, bro, but Josh is fucking killing me.
Guess what Navy SEALs do, motherfucker? They communicate and they're on the same fucking page.
Whoa.